When my granddaughter whispered that my own son was planning to forge my signature on the deed to my house, I thought grief had finally made me paranoid. But then I found the papers in his desk drawer, my handwriting, my initials, even my signature copied so perfectly it made my skin crawl. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 72 years old, though the years sit heavier on my shoulders than I ever imagined they would. My hands are rough, scarred from decades of carpentry, each callus a reminder of work done not for strangers, but for my own family. This house is proof of that labor. Every beam was lifted by my back, every nail driven by my hammer. My wife, Margaret, stood beside me as we painted the walls, her laughter echoing through rooms still smelling of fresh wood and possibility. We used to sit on the porch in those early days, coffee mugs in hand, dreaming of the future, Christmas mornings with children tumbling down the stairs, grandchildren crowding the table, and the kind of warmth that outlasts winter. Those dreams came true, for a time. The house became the stage for birthdays, for weddings, for quiet evenings when Margaret and I thought love could weather anything. But Margaret is gone now, and the walls that once echoed with laughter have learned to keep secrets. And it is in this silence that I discovered the cruelest betrayal, my own son coveting what I built with my hands, scheming to make the house his by any means. It began with little things, details I might have overlooked if I were a younger man. My son, Daniel, started showing up with questions that felt rehearsed. Casual, almost careless on the surface. "Dad, where do you keep the deed to the house?" he asked one Sunday, after helping me prune the lemon tree in the backyard. His tone was light, but I caught the faint stiffness in his shoulders, the way he avoided my eyes when I answered. "In the old oak cabinet," I said without much thought. That cabinet had been in the living room for decades, the bottom drawer always sticking on humid days. He nodded, too quickly, and changed the subject to football. A week later, he brought over his wife and insisted on helping me sort through paperwork. He stacked bills and insurance forms with unnecessary efficiency, his wife pretending to dust shelves she never touched before. When I stepped out to make coffee, I heard the drawer of the oak cabinet creak open. Their voices hushed. A pause too long to be innocent. I should have asked what they were doing. But a father wants to believe in his child, even when the evidence begins to pile like storm clouds on the horizon. The storm broke on a Tuesday afternoon. My granddaughter, Daniel's own little girl, barely 10, wandered into the kitchen with the kind of seriousness children rarely carry. She slid into the chair across from me, her legs swinging above the floor. "Grandpa," she whispered, eyes darting toward the hallway, "Daddy has a paper with your name on it. He said he's going to use it soon." My chest tightened. "What kind of paper?" She frowned, concentrating. "It looked like your writing. Like when you sign my birthday cards." But he was showing Mommy and laughing. "He said once you sign, the house is his." Her words struck harder than any illness, harder than the heart attack I'd survived 3 years earlier. My son, my own flesh and blood, wasn't just waiting for me to fade away. He was preparing to erase me while I still breathed. That night, when the house had settled into its familiar silence, I walked to the oak cabinet. I pulled open the drawer, papers rustling like dry leaves. At the very back, hidden beneath old tax returns, I found it, a folder I didn't recognize. Inside lay a deed with my name written in my handwriting, except it wasn't mine. The signature was flawless, down to the faint curl in the tail of my R. But the ink looked too fresh, the strokes too deliberate, as if someone had practiced 100 times before daring to put pen to paper. My stomach turned cold. I sat there for hours, the forged deed spread open on the dining table, the lamp casting a sickly yellow glow over the betrayal. My hands, the same hands that built these walls, trembled as I realized what Daniel had done. He hadn't just forged my name. He'd tried to steal the very heart of my life, the house Margaret and I dreamed into being. And that was when the slow sorrow inside me hardened into something else. I didn't sleep that night. The forged deed lay on the table like an accusation, its edges curling under the soft draft from the kitchen window. I tried, more than once, to fold it back into the folder and shove it away, but every time my hand reached for it, my eyes would catch the signature, my name, but not mine, and I would feel my chest tighten again. I walked the length of the hallway a dozen times, my slippers whispering over the wooden floorboards I'd nailed down with Margaret at my side. She used to hum when we worked, some tune she never named, just a melody that kept time better than any hammer could. I could almost hear it now, echoing faintly in the empty air. What would she say, seeing this? That our boy, the child we raised, had turned his hands to theft, not by breaking windows, but by imitating the very lines of my hand? Would she blame me? Would she say I'd been blind, too trusting? I sat in her old chair by the fireplace, the fabric worn smooth on the arms where her hands once rested. The house groaned with its familiar nighttime sounds, but they no longer felt like comfort. Every creak of the rafters sounded like a warning. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a countdown. I thought of Daniel as a boy. His small hand wrapped around mine when we walked to school. The way he'd burst through the door after baseball practice, dropping his glove and shouting, "Did you see me, Dad? Did you see?" I did see. I always saw. I saw every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every triumph. I carried him through nights of fever, cheered for him from bleachers, paid for the braces he never thanked me for. I thought that was what love was, 1,000 invisible sacrifices. And yet here I sat, staring at proof that he saw me not as a father, but as an obstacle. The betrayal gnawed at me in waves. One moment, I was furious, my fists clenching at the thought of him laughing with his wife over my forged signature. The next, I felt hollow, as if someone had already lowered me into the ground and shoveled dirt over my chest. By 2 in the morning, I tried lying in bed, but the ceiling pressed down like a lid. My heart wouldn't slow. I turned on the lamp, reached for the photo on the nightstand, Margaret in the garden, holding a basket of tomatoes. Her smile was soft, private, the kind she reserved for me. Did we fail him? I whispered into the stillness. Did I raise a man who thinks the world owes him everything I built? The photo, of course, offered no reply. Only silence. I padded back to the dining room, poured myself a glass of water, and sat again with the document. I traced the lines of the fake signature with my finger, studying the precision. Daniel must have practiced this for weeks, maybe months. That thought hurt worst of all, not that he forged it, but that he had the patience, the determination, and used it for this. He could have built something of his own with that energy. Instead, he spent it plotting how to erase me from my own home. By dawn, the kitchen smelled of cold coffee and regret. The sun crept through the curtains, spilling pale light across the forged deed. I hadn't closed my eyes once. But the night had done one thing for me, it burned away the shock. What was left was resolve. If Daniel wanted to play with documents, then he would learn that paper cuts both ways. Morning light always used to be Margaret's favorite. She said it made the kitchen tiles look like they were glowing. That morning, it only revealed how little I had slept. My reflection in the window was haggard, eyes rimmed red, but beneath that exhaustion I felt something steadier than I had in years. I had spent the night grieving the son I thought I had. Now it was time to deal with the man he had become. Revenge doesn't start with shouting. It starts with paper. And paper, I knew well. In my younger days, before my hands stiffened with age, I had spent decades handling contracts. I'd read every clause, every footnote, every hidden catch that could ruin a man who didn't look close enough. I wasn't a lawyer, but in real estate you learned the language, or you lost everything. Daniel had forgotten that I built more than this house. I built deals. I built safeguards. The first step was to protect what mattered, the house. By mid-morning, I had pulled out my old file box, dust coating its lid like a forgotten season. Inside were the originals, deeds, tax records, insurance papers. Proof of every year I had paid, every dollar I had put into these walls. I laid them across the dining table, a fortress of ink and signatures that no forgery could touch. Next came the trust. Margaret and I had spoken of it years ago, in the quiet after her diagnosis, when she worried about leaving me alone. We never finished the paperwork then, but the folder was still there, half prepared by the lawyer she trusted. I ran my fingers over the pages, feeling the weight of her foresight. She must have known. Margaret always seemed to know. I made an appointment that afternoon. The young woman at the lawyer's office tried to sound brisk, but when I handed her the forged deed inside a clear plastic sleeve, her face drained of color. She flipped through it twice, then looked at me as though I'd shown her a weapon. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "From my son's drawer," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I want it recorded that this is not my signature. And I want my house placed in trust, effective immediately." The rest of the day passed in signatures, real ones this time. My hand ached, but each stroke of the pen felt like nailing down a board, tightening the structure. Stronger. Safer. When I returned home, the house felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. For the first time since finding that forgery, I wasn't powerless. Daniel thought he could imitate my hand. He had no idea he was walking into a trap of my design. That evening, I poured myself a small glass of scotch and sat at the table, the documents spread before me. I imagined Daniel's face when he discovered the trust. How his practiced charm would falter, how the laughter would dry up in his throat. He had played his game in secret, believing me old and blind. Now, I would play mine in daylight. And daylight was merciless. 3 days passed before Daniel showed up at my door again. He had a smile plastered across his face, the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. In his hands was a 6-pack of beer, as if that could disguise the weight of his intentions. "Thought I'd drop by, Dad," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Figured we could watch the game together, like old times." Old times. He hadn't watched a game with me in years. Still, I played along. I led him to the living room, set 2 glasses on the coffee table, and poured his beer into one. My scotch remained untouched. We sat through a quarter of football, his eyes flicking between the screen and me. He laughed too loud at jokes from the commentators, shifted in his seat as though his own body betrayed his patience. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Hey, Dad. I was wondering. Do you ever think about, simplifying things? Paperwork, the house, all that. I mean, it's a lot for one person to manage." There it was, the opening gambit. Soft, casual, practiced. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, trying to look concerned. But I caught the hunger behind his eyes. "I manage fine," I said, keeping my tone light. "Been doing it a long time. Margaret and I always believed in keeping records straight." He nodded too quickly. "Right, of course. I just meant, sometimes people get taken advantage of, you know. Papers get lost, signatures get. I don't know, Miss Reed. It might be good to have me look over everything, just in case." I studied him over the rim of my glass. He didn't know I'd already locked the originals away in the lawyer's office, didn't know the trust papers were filed, notarized, and safe. He was groping in the dark, hoping I would hand him the light. "I appreciate the concern," I said evenly. "But your mother always said I had the sharpest memory in the family. Every page, every signature, I remember them all." Something flickered in his expression. The faintest crack. His jaw tightened before he forced another smile. "Of course, Dad. Just looking out for you." We sat in silence after that, the roar of the crowd on the television filling the air. I let him squirm, sipping my drink slowly, never breaking eye contact. In that moment, I saw him not as the boy I once carried on my shoulders, but as a man trying to calculate how soon he could erase me from the story. And he had no idea that the story was already written, and not by his hand. It was a week later when I caught Daniel making his first move. I had begun the habit of keeping my curtains cracked just slightly in the evenings. The living room lamp cast a faint glow, enough to suggest I was home, but not enough to reveal I was standing in the darkened kitchen, watching. At 8:47 p.m., Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. He didn't knock. Instead, he slipped around to the side entrance, the one Margaret used to call the neighbor's door. I knew better than to step out and confront him. Instead, I crouched low behind the kitchen counter and listened. The old oak cabinet groaned as its drawer was pulled open. Paper rustled. He was rifling, searching. The folder I had found, the one with the forged deed, was no longer there, but Daniel didn't know that. He cursed under his breath, a sound I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager caught sneaking out. Then came the click of his phone camera. Snap. Snap. He was taking photos of the documents, whatever he could get his hands on. I leaned forward just enough to see his silhouette in the faint light, a man hunched like a thief in his own father's house. My son. The next morning, I followed him, not openly, of course. I had friends, old union buddies who owed me favors, and one of them tipped me off when Daniel walked into the county clerk's office carrying a folder under his arm. My heart thudded in my chest as I slipped into the lobby minutes after him. I took a seat across the room, hidden behind a stack of public notice boards, and watched. He approached the counter, smiling, shaking the clerk's hand like a man about to close a deal. He laid the folder down, slid the forged deed across with an air of confidence. From where I sat, I could see him lean in, speaking low. The clerk frowned, adjusted her glasses, and studied the page. I imagined Daniel's voice, smooth, persuasive, trying to sound casual as he suggested his father had already signed over the property. My fists clenched against my thighs. I wanted to storm over, to shout the truth. But I held still. This wasn't the moment to stop him. This was the moment to let him reveal himself. The clerk excused herself, carrying the document into a back office. Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at his phone, drumming his fingers on the counter. His confidence was slipping. When the clerk returned, she was not alone. Another man accompanied her, older, in a suit. They spoke quietly to Daniel. His posture stiffened. His smile faltered. He tried to argue, his hands gesturing with more force, but the suit only shook his head. I watched my son pick up the forged deed with a trembling hand, shove it back into the folder, and leave the office with his jaw tight. He didn't notice me sitting 20 feet away, calm as stone. As he pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot, I stayed seated, letting the clerk and her supervisor walk back to their offices. The forged document had been flagged. A note would be entered into the record. And Daniel? He had just branded himself, in ink, as a man willing to forge his own father's name. I walked out 10 minutes later, sunlight spilling across the courthouse steps, my stride slow and measured. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. The trap was sprung. And my son had stepped into it with both feet. The first ripple came in the mail. A week after Daniel's courthouse visit, I found an envelope slipped under my door, official, stamped with the seal of the county recorder's office. Inside was a letter, polite but firm, informing me that an attempt had been made to file property transfer documents in your name, which have been deemed inconsistent and potentially fraudulent. They requested that I visit the office at my earliest convenience to confirm ownership records. I sat at the table, the letter trembling in my hands, not from fear, but from the vindication coursing through me. My son thought he was clever, but the county now had his fingerprints on a forgery. And I had no intention of stopping them from tightening the net. I did go to the office, but not to argue. I went to smile politely, to provide my driver's license, to confirm with a steady voice that no transfer had ever been authorized. I let them make copies of my originals. I let them file the trust paperwork I had signed. And when the clerk asked if I wanted to press charges immediately, I shook my head. Not yet, I said softly. Let the rope get tighter. The second ripple came through one of my old friends, Jim, a retired sheriff. He still had ears in the department. He called me one evening with a chuckle in his voice. Ray, he said, your boy's name came up in a fraud inquiry. Quiet for now, but they've got his photo walking into the clerk's office with that folder. They're comparing signatures. He's on their radar. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat back in my chair. Across the room, Margaret's picture watched me. For the first time since I'd found the forgery, I spoke to her aloud. It's working, love. He's building his own gallows. The third ripple was the loudest. A certified letter arrived at Daniel's house. I didn't have to open it to know what it contained, I simply drove by and watched from my car as he stood on his porch, tearing it open. His shoulders stiffened as his eyes scanned the page. He looked around wildly, as though the world itself had betrayed him. Then, in a flash of anger, he crumpled the letter and hurled it into the yard. I stayed parked at the end of the street, engine off, heart steady. Watching him pace, watching him kick at his own lawn, I realized something profound: the law was doing the work for me. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to slam fists against the table. All I needed was patience. The first attempt had rattled him, but not broken him. I should have known my son well enough to expect that. Daniel was always the type who, when caught with his hand in the cookie jar as a boy, would insist the jar had fallen onto his hand by accident. Now, at nearly 40, he was still trying to talk his way out of corners. 2 weeks after the letter from the county, I noticed his car pull into my driveway again. This time he didn't bother with pleasantries. No 6-pack of beer, no forced smile. He came in fast, eyes darting around the living room like he was checking for hidden microphones. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice, "we need to talk." I set down my book and folded my glasses, careful not to betray how calm I felt inside. "Of course," I said. "What's on your mind?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers tapping against each other. "There's been some confusion at the clerk's office. About paperwork for the house. Someone's making it harder than it needs to be. If you could just sign a few things to clear it up, everything would be smooth." I let silence stretch between us. My heartbeat was steady. "Sign what, exactly?" I asked. He fumbled, pulling a folder from his jacket. The same folder I'd seen him carry into the courthouse weeks earlier. Inside were newer documents, another version of the deed, this one sloppier. His forgery of my signature was still careful, but under pressure, it lacked the patience of the first. "You don't need to read it all," he said quickly. "It's just formality. You'll still live here as long as you want. It just makes things easier for taxes, for the family later." Taxes. Family. Words he thought would lull me. He didn't know that I had already seen the county's red stamps across his first attempt. He didn't know that my trust paperwork was filed, signed, sealed. "I'll think about it," I said, sliding the folder back toward him with one finger. "Leave it here." His eyes flashed. Anger, impatience, maybe even fear. "Dad, you don't understand. If we don't move on this now, you could lose everything. People your age, mistakes happen." That was when the tension broke inside me, not into rage, but into something colder. He was playing the bold man card. Treating me like a half-senile fool who couldn't read his own name. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and studied him. "Daniel," I said softly, "I remember every board I nailed in this house. Every page of every deed I've signed. I don't make mistakes with my name." For the first time, his confidence slipped. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists on his knees. "Fine," he snapped, grabbing the folder back. "But don't say I didn't warn you." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I stayed in my chair, the quiet settling around me like an old coat. But this time, I didn't just wait. I called the clerk's office the next morning and asked to be notified if anyone attempted to file documents on my property again. The woman on the line, already familiar with the forgery, promised she would. Sure enough, 3 days later, the call came. Daniel had returned, this time more aggressive, insisting the papers were valid. He had raised his voice, claimed there must be bureaucratic incompetence. The clerk had refused him. And now his name was not just in a file, it was in an official report. From my living room chair, receiver pressed to my ear, I smiled. The rope was tightening. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning. I knew it was coming, the clerk had promised to notify me, but holding the envelope in my hand still made my pulse quicken. It was addressed to Daniel, not me, but the sheriff's deputy had delivered it here first by mistake. A fraud investigation, it read. Court appearance required. By noon, Daniel was pounding on my door, face flushed, sweat beading at his hairline. He waved the letter in my face like a man holding a snake he couldn't drop. "What the hell is this, Dad? They're saying I tried to file fake papers. Someone's out to get me." I let him shout. I let the panic spill from him until he was pacing my living room like a caged animal. When he finally stopped, I spoke in the same calm voice I had used on him as a child when he was caught lying about broken windows or stolen candy. "Daniel," I said, "sit down." He did, though his legs bounced nervously. "You forged my name. Twice. You walked into the courthouse with documents that were not yours to carry. And now the law knows it." His eyes darted away. I was just trying to, Dad, you don't understand. You're old, you live alone. I thought it would be easier if. Stop. My voice cracked like a whip. He froze. Don't lie to me, and don't lie to yourself. You wanted the house. You wanted to erase me from it while I'm still breathing. Admit it. His mouth opened, closed. For a long moment, the only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "Yes," he whispered. "I wanted it. The house, the land, everything. Mary and we thought it was time." The words cut deep, but I felt something else stir inside me, relief. He had spoken it aloud. "Good," I said. "Now you'll tell them too." "What?" His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You'll tell the judge, the clerk, the lawyers, every person who asks you what you tried to do. You'll tell them exactly what you just told me. That you forged your father's name for greed." He leapt to his feet. "You can't make me." But I was already holding up a small device, a simple black recorder. I pressed play. His own voice spilled into the room, shaky, desperate, "Yes. I wanted it. The house, the land, everything." Daniel went pale. "You thought you could outright me," I said softly. "But I've been keeping records longer than you've been alive. This time, your words will stand in ink even you can't erase." The trial was quick. The county clerk testified. The forged documents were displayed side by side with my originals. And when the judge asked if Daniel had anything to say in his defense, I clicked on the recorder. His confession filled the courtroom. The silence that followed was absolute. His wife buried her face in her hands. My granddaughter stared at him with wide, confused eyes. Daniel was found guilty of fraud. The house remained mine, protected by the trust, shielded from his reach forever. And as the gavel fell, I looked at my son one last time. Not with anger. Not even with pity. Just with the steady, unshakable truth that he had written his own downfall. It was 3 days after the trial when I finally drove across town to Daniel's house. The yard looked unkempt, weeds pushing up through cracks in the walk, as if even the grass had turned against him. His wife didn't answer when I knocked. But from the upstairs window, a small hand waved. Moments later, the door creaked open, and there she was, my granddaughter, Lily. 10 years old, with her mother's dark hair but Margaret's eyes. Eyes that saw more than any child should. "Grandpa," she whispered, pulling me inside quickly as if she were sneaking me past a guard. "I'm so glad you came." She slid into the chair across from me, her legs swinging just above the floor, just as she had when she warned me weeks earlier about her father's scheme. "I'm sorry about Dad," she said, her voice small but steady. "I tried to tell him it was wrong. I told him he shouldn't take what's yours. But he wouldn't listen." I reached across the table and took her hand. It was warm, small, but strong. Stronger than her father's had ever been. "You did more than enough," I told her. "You saved me. Without you, I might not have found out until it was too late." Her eyes glistened, but she smiled. "I'll always be on your side, Grandpa." The words broke something inside me, not in pain, but in relief. I had lost a son to greed, but here, before me, was proof that not all bloodlines run sour. I pulled a folded paper from my pocket and slid it across the table. The trust document, updated after the trial. Her name was there, plain as day. Trustee. Beneficiary. She gasped when she saw it. "But Grandpa." "This house," I said firmly, "was built for family. Your grandmother's laughter is still in those walls. One day, it will be yours. And I want you to protect it the way she would have wanted. Not with greed. With love." Her small fingers clutched the paper like it was treasure. In her eyes, I saw something Daniel had lost long ago, respect. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. Strong. Not because I had beaten my son, but because I had found my granddaughter's heart standing beside me. Margaret had been right, all those years ago. The house wasn't just wood and nails. It was legacy. And now, I knew it was safe.
Greetings, and thanks for spending your time with us today. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I want to wish you a peaceful day or a restful evening, wherever you may be. Take care, and we'll see you next time.